So, today I've just finished reading the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and I just thought I'd do a quick video that's a bit of a review on it, but also thinking about how it might be in an academic environment. I don't think it is on any of the GCSE or A-level syllabuses that I know of, but it might be one day, and even if it isn't, it could be a book that you bring in as secondary reading, and I just thought it was a really interesting book, so I thought I'd do a short video. So I'm just going to go through the plot really quickly. So it's set in 1946, obviously the year after the end of the war, set in Britain, starts off in London, and then, as is clear from the title, also involves Guernsey. There was also a bit in France, this bit in Germany, so it is quite a multicultural book to some extent. I mean, most of the characters are British. Oh, there's also a bit that goes to Australia. So it's an epistolary novel. Epistolary just means that it comes in different parts, so books that come in diaries are epistolary, or like this one, it's a series of letters. The letters are mainly, I would say, from Juliet, who is the protagonist, but they do come to and from many of the characters in the book. Nearly all have been either sent to or sent by Juliet, though, making it clear that she is the protagonist. Sorry about that. So it starts off nothing to do with Guernsey. It's Juliet. She's an author. She's in London doing book tours, having had a successful column during the war, writing as a lady called Izzy Bickerstaffe. And she starts receiving loads of flowers from a mystery admirer, whose name is Mark. She gets irritated by him. She also has a really good relationship with her editor, Sydney. So Sydney is gay, but they have a really good relationship. The plot is it's a little bit implausible. So basically, there's a guy on the Isle of Guernsey. So it's between Britain and France. Juliet gets a letter from a man called Dorsey. He's found a book that used to belong to her. It's a book that she wrote her address in, and he writes to her to ask if she can send him some more information about the author, because in Guernsey there are no bookshops because it was occupied during the war. So it is quite an out there idea, but Juliet responds to him and sends him a book and gives him more information about the author. The author's David Lau, and she hears about Mark's involvement in what is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and the name intrigues her. So she soon starts conversing with several members of the society. They send letters back and forth. Basically, the society was formed during the occupation as a cover story for a dinner party that the members had held to stop them getting arrested by the Germans. Sorry about that. And Juliet is intrigued. She finds out that the lady who came up with the name, Elizabeth, is no longer on Guernsey. She was arrested during the war. And Juliet, this is the first time she's heard about sort of the occupation of the Channel Islands, which wasn't particularly common, and she starts to think about writing a newspaper article about them and asks for more information about the occupation. So she goes to Guernsey to find out more. She wants to meet her friends, and it's really nice the way that in the letters you do feel Juliet's warmth for these people she's writing to, even though she's never met them for a long time. Just before she goes, Mark proposes, even though they've only known each other a couple of months. So she turns him down and says, "I need more time," and he tries to persuade her not to go, but she goes anyway. Sydney does joke with Juliet, saying, "Well, are you allowed to go if Sydney doesn't give you permission?" Sorry, if Mark doesn't give you permission, but Juliet just goes. This is an interesting distinction because there's also a film of the book, and in the film, when Mark proposes, he does so just as she's boarding the boat to Jersey, and in the film she accepts. Just an interesting point. So as soon as she gets to the island, Juliet is treated like an old friend. She talks in a letter to Sydney about how she basically knows, or feels like she knows, all these members of the literary and potato peel pie society. So she takes on helping to care for Kit. Kit is the 4-year-old daughter of Elizabeth, who's been orphaned because Elizabeth is Elizabeth was arrested. Elizabeth was partially arrested, or at least not helped, by the fact that Kit was is the daughter of a German named Christian, and many people were shocked that an islander would engage in sexual relations with one of the Germans. The society do receive a letter. Again, this is a bit where it's slightly implausible, because they receive a random letter from a lady who was in the concentration camp with Elizabeth, so she is able to inform them a little bit about what life was like in the concentration camp, and also say that Elizabeth was unfortunately shot. But this provides a kind of closure for that part of the narrative. Remy then spends some time in Guernsey getting to know everyone, but eventually Remy does decide to go and live in Paris. So Juliet's been extending her ideas from writing an article. She's now thinking of writing a book, and she's got loads and loads of anecdotes from lots of people on Guernsey, particularly members of the society, and she sends her letters to Sydney Hunslet to collect them, and Juliet she knows it's not working, but she doesn't know why, and Sydney writes back almost immediately and says the reason is you need a core, and the way you can have that core is by centering your book on Elizabeth. Not too long later, Juliet gets a surprise visit from Mark, unfortunately just as she's having a romantic moment with Dorsey. But this time, when Mark starts talking about Juliet being saddled with Kit, Juliet turns around and tells him to get out and mind his own business, which everyone is very glad about. It is then a bit later in the novel, but as you draw to the close, Juliet, she's been admitting her love for Dorsey in her letters to her friend who is Sydney's sister, Sophie, and she realises that he feels that way for her too, runs to him and asks him to marry her. Spoiler alert, he does of course agree. So Juliet ends the book in her final letter when she's writing to Sydney and asks him to come to Guernsey for the wedding so he can give her away. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the stuff that I liked about the book, and some of the stuff which I think could possibly be improved. So, in terms of good points, now first and foremost for me, the most important thing about this book is that it's engaging, it's enjoyable, and it's entertaining. It's fun to read, it's a nice read. I really enjoyed it. And whether it's technically correct in every way or not, that is fundamentally for me what makes a good book. And there are a few reasons why I really liked it. I thought it was fun in the sense that it's not ridiculous. It sounds like it's going to be ridiculous, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, but actually it's a real balance of the almost unbelievable, the ridiculous, the idea of the Potato Peel Pie Society. It's also playing as well with themes of the Nazi occupation of Guernsey, and it plays with those really serious themes and manages to balance that tension really well. So it is enjoyable to read. The characters, I think, are designed to be enjoyable to some extent. They're a little bit stereotypical, but they are fun. And it feels realistic while you're reading it. And I've developed an affection for the characters, at least. I think I really felt an affection not only for Juliet, but also for Sydney, for Kit, to some extent for Dorsey. It really is a book that it feels pretty authentic while you're reading it. That is on the surface. I'm not saying if you look at it deeply it's necessarily perfect, but on the surface, to me at least, it felt realistic, and I was able to develop an affection for the characters. I also thought the plot held together really well considering its complexities. Now, I know that the review I went through of its plot was very haphazard, and it is quite a haphazard plot. I feel like Marianne and Annie, they really tried to get a lot in, and I think it's impressive how much they've managed to get in, to have everything from a post-war journalist who became famous during the war, her homosexual editor, his sister. You've also got the island of Guernsey, the individual characters on the island of Guernsey. You've got Elizabeth and how all the characters fit in around Elizabeth, and how that tale fits into the Nazi occupation of Guernsey, and how that fits into the wider context of Britain during the war. I think makes a solid plot line. Which I really liked. Now, I haven't said bad points, but there are some irritating points. Now, one of these is that actually looking back, when you look at the different letters, there aren't really very different character voices between them. So, for me, at least, I didn't think about it when I was reading it. But in terms of looking at Dorsey's speech compared to Juliet's speech, or not speech because it's writing, but their writing styles, I would expect more difference between a Guernsey farmer and a London journalist. And I think that is a slight flaw in some ways. I think that although it feels realistic while you're reading it, if you look stylistically at how they write, you don't have these nuances which are particular to each character, which I think is a shame, but it's also predictable but barely plausible. Now, this is quite a common irritation in a lot of books. I think the predictability that ultimately Juliet is going to reject Mark, that Juliet is going to adopt Kit and marry Dorsey and live in Guernsey forever. It is a bit cliche, and that is irritating. It's also barely plausible, because ultimately the situation that Kit's left in, how she then came to be adopted by Juliet, it really, I find that hard to understand. I think you've got to take it to some extent with a pinch of salt, in the fact that it's set in the post-World War II context, and actually controls and things weren't as set then, and orphans from the war, especially in sort of Kit's case, where one parent is imprisoned and the other parent was German, probably was a lot of confusion and lots of different scenarios, but it doesn't feel particularly plausible that she would then be able to live permanently with Juliet, who she's only known for, well, she seems to move in after only a few weeks, and then so that's something that I found irritating. I also find Isola's, I don't know how to say that, but I found her detective notes at the end. There's a short break from the letters just before the final letter that Juliet sends to Sydney, and that just irritated me. It felt very much like Sheffer and Barrows didn't know how to get Juliet's realisation of her love for Dorsey into letters, and it feels like they've said, oh, we can't do this, so we're going to have to take a different view. And I might actually do a really short video just looking at some of the language in those detective notes and the way in which they reveal that discovery. Now, the final thing I want to look at quickly is the members of the Literary Society, and just, the characterisation. So, the hinge of the novel is really Elizabeth, and I've also put Kit in with Elizabeth because I think that as Elizabeth's daughter, Kit does effectively serve not as a replacement Elizabeth, but in literary terms I would say they're quite equivalent. It's sort of, life used to revolve around Elizabeth and now it revolves around Kit. It revolves around Kit because she's Elizabeth's daughter, but also because she's a child. I think there's a lot of reflection of the two characters in one another, which makes sense as their mother and daughter. It's a bit like, again, Kit seems to be the uniting factor for Juliet and Dorsey, but that she's actually a symbol for Elizabeth, who originally has ended up bringing them together through the Potato Peel Pioneer Literary Society. Now, the members of the Literary Club, so there's Dorsey. Dorsey is, I actually spent the majority of the novel thinking that was his last name. It's not, it's his first name. Dorsey effectively kickstarts the whole Guernsey plot by writing to Juliet. He is a strong and silent type to some extent. He seems to fit well with Kit. His manner with Juliet is as expected. It's quite predictable when he becomes very, very quiet around her after Mark suddenly bursts in on them during a very close encounter, and likewise at the end he's very, very quick to put down his boundaries and immediately says yes. He's also strong-minded. It's him who really persuades Rumi to come over to the island. And he is probably the main focus of Juliet. I think Juliet realises, or at least feels, her love for Dorsey long before it actually appears in the letters, although I think there is quite a subtlety there, even if it is a predictable subtlety. Then there's Amelia, who is just one of the lovable members of the society. I actually love characters like Amelia, even Eli, Will Thisbe, and Isola. I think to some extent I find it difficult to differentiate them now, even though I've just finished reading the novel. I don't immediately think, oh yeah, Amelia did this and this and this, and Isola did this and this and this. I'd say they're quite confused in my brain, but what they are all, which I really like, is they are quirky. And that's part of the thing, which again means that the book is really fun. Now, I know that from an academic perspective, I haven't really said a lot, but if you would like a more in-depth video about some of the academia in the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, if you'd like maybe some analysis, text, particularly perhaps of the detective notes or of any of the letters, the structure, I'd be happy. This is just a bit of an introduction to it, a bit of a review, and my first video in quite a long time.